Come journey across the globe in an immersive storytelling podcast with filmmaker Salim Reshamwala on Pin Drop from TED. This season, check out musicians trying to save an indigenous language in Lima. What happens to the tourism paradise Rapa Nui, also known as Easter Island, when people stop showing up. And explore what it means to start a Black utopia. You can listen to Pin Drop wherever you get your podcasts. This is a CBC podcast.
This shift to working from home hasn't been easy for companies or workers either. One of the people making it possible, though, is my next guest. He's the CEO of Slack, the wildly popular messaging system. And since COVID struck, the company has expanded significantly. Stewart Butterfield is originally from British Columbia. He's now based in San Francisco. Stewart, good morning.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Matt.
Thanks for joining us. Take me back to March, when it seemed like everything changed in the space of a couple of days. When the world got turned upside down and inside out, what were those early days like at Slack?
Yeah, there were two tracks going on. And one was kind of in conversation with other executives, either friends or partners. And, the initial conversations were, are you taking this seriously? And what do you think? Actually close the office? And then there was the internal conversations with employees. And it both changed very quickly. So first of all, people started to get serious about closing the office. We had our big global sales offsite event. It's like 800 people flying into Phoenix. And that was going to start in 4 days, and we canceled it. And we had an employee who was contacted by the CDC because they had been exposed. They'd been on one of the cruise ships. And thankfully, they didn't contract COVID. But because of that, we closed down the office. This is, Thursday afternoon, we decided we'll close the office on Friday. We'll do this big deep clean. They have people come and spray stuff. But by Monday, it was apparent that we were just shutting down. So it really, it was kind of 72 hours from, curiosity and is this something we should take seriously to the world had completely changed.
When did you realize that it wasn't just you that was shutting down the office, but people all around the world? And that would mean that a service like yours would become even more important than it had been in the days and weeks before.
San Francisco, and then I think the tech companies in particular, were a little bit earlier in deciding voluntarily that they were going to close their doors and have employees work from home. And it was probably a week after we shut our doors that we really realized the growth that was happening, because it started in Asia. And then if you remember, Italy was hit pretty hard. Mm-hmm. So we started seeing a lot more usage and a lot more new customers signing up in Italy. And then I think March 11th, we had our earnings call the next day. And the night of March 11th was, Tom Hanks saying that he had it. It was the NBA canceling the season. It was Trump announcing the travel ban. And the mood really shifted like in the space of 3 hours. I think it became a much bigger issue and a lot scarier for a lot of people. And that week from March 12th to 19th, we saw more people signing up for Slack than we had in probably the previous 6 months combined.
For people who've never used Slack, can you just give the Slack 101, what makes it different than other ways that people could communicate and collaborate?
Sure. It's so it's a messaging app, and in some sense familiar to people, and this is more or less every human in the world now, who have used WhatsApp or iMessage or SMS or Facebook Messenger or Instagram. The difference is that you address messages typically to what we call channels. And a channel can be created for anything. Anyone can create one. And what ends up happening is a channel gets created for every topic across the company. And that could be every customer, every project, every feature, every team, office location, business unit, whatever. And when the conversations happen in channels instead, there's a bunch of things that you get for free. So one is people can see across the organization. They can see what their colleagues are working on. They can search, and they search over, a much bigger range of messages than they would otherwise have. In contrast to email, if email is the principal means of communication, you join the company and you have 0 messages in your inbox and you're completely cut off from the history. And there might have been tens of millions or hundreds of millions or even billions of messages sent before you got there. You have none of that. With Slack, you have all that history. And that it ends up creating a situation where people know where to go to ask their question. They know where to go to give their update. They know where to go to get caught up on something. And that can be really transformative. So I think it's deceptively simple. And the last thing I would say, it also integrates with thousands and thousands of third-party applications, from Google Drive to Salesforce, Workday, GitHub, and the teams end up working in a set number of channels. They have their tools that they work with every day integrated, and that gives that center of gravity, that focus.
There are people who swear by it. That was fantastic, by the way. I mean, it should be from the CEO, but there are people who swear by Slack. But you've hinted at this. There are things that we miss as well. That we couldn't get even from a service like yours in terms of the interactions that we have at the office, the casual conversations. I walk by somebody's office, I say something, it turns into something larger, and then it turns into something even larger. What have you learned in the last few months about how to make that work and how to find those little bits of connective tissue that make the office what it is?
It's a great question, and I think we're very much still learning. So there's some work that we're doing, which has the side effect of also creating more opportunities for those serendipitous conversations or the spontaneous conversations. This will sound a little bananas to people at first, potentially, but something very much like Instagram stories married to that concept of a channel. Because if you have a channel for the team of people you work with most closely or the projects that are going on, if you can record a short video update of what's happening, people might be familiar with like the daily stand-up meeting where everyone gets together for 15 minutes and talks about what they're working on. This as a replacement for it, you go from a position where you're sick of looking at this person's face on a video call to watching them on video, but in a mode where you're not on camera yourself. And when you can hit the pause button and walk away for a minute and come back, and it really dramatically shifts the experience. But more to your question, one of the things we're working on is internally, we call them huddles, but that's not going to be the name that we use. But like always on audio, where the call never stops or starts. You never have to call anyone. People can just enter and leave as they want. And if you're in there, you typically have your speakers on. And if someone says something, you'll hear it. So this is not something you would do with thousands of people or company-wide. But with the team of people you're working with most closely, there's a threshold for scheduling a call, sending out a calendar invite, which is very, very high. And then there's a threshold for calling someone where you might be interrupting them and forcing them to answer the call right now, to just saying something and them hearing you, and you ask one question, or maybe there's a little bit, 15 seconds of back and forth, and then it's over. And it wouldn't have been worth calling them for that. So people wouldn't do it. And so you don't get that contact and you don't get the serendipity of other people overhearing. And we want to create opportunities for that. So I think that, as a company, we're facing all the same challenges that our customers are facing. And as a product, we're trying to move as quickly as we can to address them. But there's obviously this just explosion of new tools and services and new approaches, which is pretty exciting. And I think that over the next year or so, we'll see a lot of exciting developments, not just from Slack, but I think from the industry on a whole, to try to get the best of what we had in the office and make it available in this digital form.
What do you miss about being in the office?
Well, it's funny. If you think about the various purposes that having the office serves, for us, part of it, it's a projection of power. We have this big building and we have a logo on the side, and it says like we're important to the world. It's a cultural touchstone, the way it's designed and the interactions that people have there. It's a space for onboarding new employees and meeting recruits and hosting customers and learning and development and all hands and social interactions. And then the last thing on that list, and if you think about it in the terms I just described, probably the least important, but the one that takes up the most square footage, is like factory farm battery housing for people to sit at their computers and not talk to each other, often with their headphones on. And that part you might as well do anywhere. So the part that you miss, not that I miss waiting for the elevator, but the kind of like spontaneous meetings that you would have with people that you're waiting for the elevator, or you're in line to get some coffee, or you're swinging by the snack room to get a drink or whatever, and the ability just to walk past someone's desk and say hello, or even just smile and wave. So when we think about the future that we want to come back to, I think there's more and more organizations that are saying, we're going to go from having desks for 100% of employees to maybe 20 or 30%, because a large number of people will just work elsewhere permanently. And of the people who are working out of the office, the vast majority want to come in 1 or 2 days a week instead of 5 days a week. And I think that could be really workable. I think teams can get together, whether it's once every other week for a couple of days or once a week for a day, or whatever the combination ends up being, And that time is much more social. You're reinforcing the relationships. You're building some trust, but you're also doing the more creative work of planning and brainstorming. And then when you just have a bunch of work to do, you could do that anywhere. Like you could do that at your favorite coffee shop when that's possible. Again, you can do that from your home. You could do that from a co-working space. And you think about the commute that some people face. And there's people, you think about the way this is impacting employees. There's some who have a comfortable house that they like. They like spending time with their family. They used to have a 90-minute commute each way every day. They don't have anymore. And they're actually kind of better off and happier. The other end of the spectrum, there's people who are single parents and don't have any childcare and are in really an impossible situation. And there's other groups like, especially younger people for whom work is a bigger percentage of their social life, who got a tiny apartment in the middle of the city because that's what they could afford. And they didn't think they would be spending 24 hours a day there, who are just, they're really unhappy. They're cut off from social interactions, which they enjoyed. They're cut off from their friends. And they're in a physical environment that wasn't intended to be, one that's occupied. So it's very uneven. And that's an interesting thing to take account of when we think about how we work today.
Do you worry about the ripple effects of people moving away from office work? I mean, I'm sure it's the same around your building, but I was walking through the underground malls of Toronto under the office towers. The businesses evaporated because there were 200,000 people that walked through that mall, and suddenly there's nobody that walks through the mall. Do you worry about that? And I mean, would you have advice in some ways for people like that who've been relying on the office workers in some ways for their living?
Yeah. And there's two sides to that as well, because I don't mean to suggest that this is as important, but for a lot of people, the amenities of normal life, like the ability to go get a massage or get your hair cut or get a manicure or enjoy any of the services that those people are providing, that's also evaporated. But I mean, I'm a person who, anytime you drive past or walk past a restaurant that closed, to me, it's always tragic pre-pandemic, because no one opens a restaurant because they're a greedy, rapacious business person and they want to make a bunch of money, because restaurants are notoriously difficult. They do it because they have an idea that they want to put out in the world, or they like their mom's cooking and they want to bring it to a greater audience, or they have like a vision for this third place they want to create. I think the same thing is true for almost every small business. So it is really heartbreaking to see the impact on small businesses. I think if you're looking at it, from a coldly rational economics point of view, I think an equal number of opportunities will open up potentially in different environments or different areas, because people are still going to want the same amount of stuff. But along the way, there's just going to be this destruction. And it is really, it's tough.
The last point is just about opportunities. This seems like an opportunity to think big. And so if you're able to do that, what are the big opportunities that this pandemic will force us to, consider when it comes to the way that we work and the way that we make a living?
Yeah, if there's one challenge that's common to every kind of organization, and I mean like NGO, academic research, government, corporation, whatever, it's creating a sufficient degree of alignment among the people that the effort that people put in results in the most impact. And that's obviously good for the organization, but it's also good for the individual, because nothing is more frustrating than feeling like what you do doesn't matter. It won't have an impact because the organization is too disorganized or chaotic to have the result that you hope for.
Do you get Zoom fatigue like the rest of us?
Absolutely. And part of the solution is making some things audio only. I think the bigger part of the solution, even though it feels more daunting, is to work with a little bit more of a concentrated effort on creating artifacts, because then you didn't have to be in the meeting to give your input. You didn't have to be in the meeting to receive the update. Slack is obviously a good way to do that, but there's a million ways to do that. And forcing us to take advantage of some of those, I think, will have a positive impact, not just in mitigating against the negative effects of what's going on now, but actually pushing us to a better way of working than what we had before.
I do miss people, though. I miss people face to face.
Absolutely. Me too.
Stewart, it's great to talk to you about this. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Stewart Butterfield is the CEO of Slack.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.